Internationally, the palace's announcement hit like a silent thunderclap. American media framed Camilla as a bold figure undone by internal politics, while British headlines emphasized protocol and tradition. What neither captured fully was the emotional and strategic depth of the decision. King Charles didn't act alone. It was a coordinated concern of Princess and Prince William that brought matters to a head. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. The monarchy didn't implode. It corrected course. But for Camilla, the effect was the same, total removal from ceremonial significance. This was a moment that redefined power inside the palace walls. Not through crisis, but through a calculated return to order. Camilla's sidelining reveals how, even without public scandal, influence can collapse when it disconnects from the very tradition that once upheld it. Stability, not sympathy, guided the palace's hand. 5 minutes ago, Buckingham Palace made a kind of move that doesn't come with screaming headlines or public confrontation, but still manages to shake the monarchy to its core. The announcement was brief, almost sterile in tone, but the meaning behind it? Devastating. Queen Camilla has been removed from ceremonial influence. Not temporarily, not symbolically, formally, quietly, completely. There was no drama in the delivery, no personal message. Just a clear institutional decision, one that signaled a major shift in the royal family's internal balance of power. This wasn't the result of scandal or personal disgrace. It was something far more precise, and in many ways, far more brutal. Her role wasn't revoked with chaos. It was erased with calm, strategic detachment. This was the crown protecting itself. Over the past several months, Camilla's influence had been gradually receding, long before the public ever caught wind of it. Behind palace gates, there was discomfort. Meetings had become tense. Lines of authority began to blur. And it all traced back to the same pattern, Camilla's increasingly assertive behavior. Her approach, while perhaps well-intentioned, began to disrupt long-standing royal protocols. Her method bypassed the quiet mechanisms that hold the institution together. That didn't go unnoticed. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. Princess Anne, the monarchy's watchdog for tradition, was the first to spot the irregularities. Then came Prince William, whose future as king depends on preserving the very system his stepmother was beginning to challenge. And eventually, even King Charles, Camilla's staunchest defender, had to acknowledge the growing discord. It wasn't a personal betrayal. It was an institutional necessity. What they witnessed wasn't some spectacular power grab. It was slower, more insidious. Small adjustments to ceremonial plans, personal preferences creeping into tradition, and decision-making that strayed from established hierarchy. To outsiders, it might have looked like harmless delegation. Internally, it was destabilizing the structure. The crown doesn't bend to individual influence, not even when it comes from someone wearing it. And so the response came, not with confrontation, but with control. On the morning of November 28th, the palace initiated what it called a winter stabilization protocol. That language might sound technical, even boring, but behind those words was a clear action. Ceremonial duties were being restructured, authority chains realigned, and Camilla's role officially reduced. She wasn't removed from the public eye. She wasn't exiled. She was sidelined with precision, and that's the part that cuts deepest. This wasn't about media scandals or public embarrassment. This was about institutional boundaries. Camilla didn't overstep in public. She overstepped behind the scenes, in the mechanics of royal tradition, in the flow of influence that most people never see but that dictates everything. Her quiet maneuvering finally hit a wall, one built over generations to stop exactly this kind of subtle disruption. The media response captured the divide perfectly. In the UK, especially among older monarchists, the move was seen as a return to order, a sign that the monarchy still knows how to protect itself from internal drift. In the US, the tone was more sympathetic. Many viewed Camilla as a resilient figure, one who had fought decades of negative public perception and finally emerged as a legitimate partner to the king, only to be quietly removed without explanation. But inside the palace, there was no debate. Her influence had to go. There were no leaks, no warning signs for the public. The decision wasn't made for appearances. It was made to safeguard the internal machinery of the crown. Once Camilla began moving outside the established chain of command, even slightly, the system responded. Not with rage, with silence, and now, the results are clear. Camilla is no longer a force behind the curtain. She still holds the title. She'll still be photographed at events. But that's all performance. The power, the influence, the advisory weight she once carried, gone. What makes this even more dramatic is how long she worked to build that position. For years, Camilla stood in the background. She didn't demand the spotlight. She waited. She played the long game. She endured being vilified. And when she was finally embraced as queen consort, she stepped into that role with the grace the public had come to accept. But inside the institution, something changed. That acceptance turned into action. That action turned into overreach. And overreach, in the royal family, is not tolerated, not even from within. So now, Camilla finds herself still wearing the crown, but with no hand in shaping what happens beneath it. She's in the room, but not at the table. Present, but no longer pivotal. And there's no plan for her return, because this isn't just a pause. It's a reset. This story isn't about drama in the tabloid sense. It's about control. The kind of control the monarchy has always used to survive. It doesn't correct course with public outbursts. It corrects with strategy. It doesn't make examples. It erases quietly. And that's exactly what happened here. Even for King Charles, this had to be excruciating. Camilla has been his companion, his confidant, his loyal supporter through decades of personal and public pressure. But when the choice came down to personal loyalty or institutional stability, the king chose the crown. Because that's what a monarch must do, even if it means pulling back from some one day. Fought to elevate. And what about the emotional impact on Camilla herself? According to insiders, she felt it. This wasn't a ceremonial shuffle. This was a deeply personal loss. Her influence wasn't taken because of who she is. It was taken because of how the system works. Even someone who climbed the ranks so carefully isn't immune to the invisible rules of the monarchy. And that's the real takeaway. In the British royal family, power isn't just about titles or appearances. It's about trust, humility, boundaries. And when those boundaries are tested, the reaction isn't always loud, but it is always absolute. This wasn't a scandal. This was a correction. And now, we're left with the aftermath. A queen consort who has been formally sidelined. A royal family that's reasserted its values. And an institution that's made it clear tradition will always win over personality. So if you've been watching this play out and thinking, something doesn't add up, you were right. Something shifted. And now the crown has quietly moved on. Drop your thought in the comments. Was this inevitable? Was the palace right to act? And what does this say about the monarchy's future? Like the video if this deep dive helped connect the dots. Share it with someone still trying to make sense of it all. And don't forget to subscribe. Because when the royal family goes silent, that's when you need to pay the closest attention. There's a specific kind of silence that only the royal family can master. The kind that says everything without saying a single word. That's exactly what happened 5 minutes ago when Buckingham Palace released one of its coldest, most calculated statements in recent memory. In just a few words, they confirmed what insiders had feared and observers had started to suspect. Queen Camilla is out of influence, not removed from title, not removed from public view, but removed from power, real, ceremonial, operational power. The kind of influence that doesn't make the front page but runs the inner gears of the monarchy. That kind of power isn't stripped with fireworks. It's taken away quietly, clinically, behind closed doors, and when the public finally hears about it, the decision is already set in stone. And this wasn't a scandal. There was no public incident, no leaked recording, no slip-up that could be pinned to a PR disaster. No, this was worse, in royal terms, because this wasn't a public problem. It was an internal one, a deep, growing discomfort with how Camilla had begun to operate behind the scenes. Her increasing assertiveness, her decisions made without protocol, and her subtle reconfigurations of ceremonial order had finally crossed an invisible line. The monarchy has survived for generations by adhering to one thing above all else: structure. The royal hierarchy is delicate. And when someone, even a queen consort, starts bending that structure to suit personal preferences, the response is always swift and silent. What made this unraveling so significant is who it came from. This wasn't some anonymous aide leaking concerns to the press. This came from within. Princess Anne, Prince William, and yes, King Charles himself. Princess Anne doesn't do theatrics. Her loyalty isn't to personalities, it's to the institution. So when she started noticing deviations in ceremonial tradition, she didn't speak publicly, she acted internally. And Prince William, whose role as heir depends entirely on the continuity of the crown's integrity, reportedly aligned with her concerns. What they were seeing wasn't someone simply stepping into their role. It was someone trying to shape it beyond the system's comfort zone. For months, the palace had been quietly monitoring these shifts. Camilla's influence wasn't vanishing overnight. It was being peeled away layer by layer. Internal meetings became more structured, ceremonial approvals redirected. Her presence, while still visible, started to feel peripheral. But the tipping point came with the November 28th announcement. Masked as a procedural adjustment, referred to by the palace as a winter stabilization protocol, this was, in reality, a complete and decisive reorganization, a ceremonial demotion without ever using the word. Her authority, her say in ceremonial structure, her behind-the-scenes access, removed. Gone. This wasn't damage control. This was institutional discipline. And the emotional weight of that decision? Heavy. For Camilla, it's not just about losing duties. It's about losing trust. The trust she'd worked for years to rebuild after decades of public skepticism. The trust she had finally earned from the firm. And the trust that, once broken inside the royal system, is almost never repaired. Because this isn't a family that forgets. This is a structure that adjusts. Quietly. Permanently. It's important to understand that Camilla didn't do something explosive. She didn't leak state secrets or break royal conduct. But she did, according to senior insiders, try to assert control where there are strict boundaries. In the monarchy, there are lanes, deeply entrenched, unwritten, but ironclad lanes. Camilla began swerving. And when the system corrected, it didn't just tap the brakes. It rerouted the entire... The result? A queen consort who remains, in name, at the top, but in practice, no longer central to how things run. Now, let's talk about Charles. His role in this is undeniably complicated. He is both husband and monarch, and for years, he went to great lengths to legitimize Camilla's position. He didn't just marry her, he rebuilt her image. He slowly and deliberately introduced her to the public, to the press, to the ceremonial core of the monarchy. Every step was calculated to bring her in, fold her into tradition, and prepare her for the spotlight. But the moment that ambition began to challenge the very system it was built on, he had to make a choice. Personal loyalty versus institutional integrity. And in the end, the king did what kings are required to do. He chose a crown. Sources say he didn't take the decision lightly. This wasn't a punishment. It was a preservation move. But even so, the impact was undeniable. Camilla had gone from Charles' closest confidant in royal affairs to someone whose access to influence had been completely curbed. Still in the building, but not in the room. It's a shift that has international consequences. American media framed the move as a stark example of how brittle royal power can be. Camilla, in the eyes of many Americans, had come to represent resilience. A woman who had gone from public enemy to respected figure, only to be quietly cut out when she got too close to the controls. In the UK, it was more divided. Some felt uneasy about how far she had been allowed to rise in the first place. Others saw the move as proof that the monarchy still knows how to regulate itself, tradition reasserting itself after a brief period of overreach. But either way, the message was clear. There's no such thing as permanent power inside the palace. Not unless it's earned, protected, and carefully managed. And even then, it's conditional. That's what makes this such a powerful moment. Not because it ended in scandal, but because it ended in silence. A quiet, strategic, institutional shutdown of one of the most significant royal figures of the past 2 decades. Not for what she said, not for what she did publicly, but for how she operated internally. For how she began to disturb the fragile balance of tradition and authority that holds this entire machine together. And now, That machine has realigned. And William, Charles, they are back at the center, not because they pushed someone out, but because they upheld the one thing the monarchy can never risk losing: control. The consequences for Camilla are long-term. Her title remains. Her face will still appear on programs, at events, next to the king. But make no mistake, the decision-making power she once wielded is gone. The influence, the leverage, the institutional weight, reassigned, redistributed, and no longer hers to carry. And it's not coming back. If you've been following this story and wondering why it feels so different, so final, it's because this wasn't about correcting mistake. It was about removing a threat to the system. A gentle threat, perhaps, but a threat nonetheless. Camilla's rise was always controversial. But her fall, it's been quiet, bloodless, and entirely by design. She didn't lose the title. She lost the trust. And that, in the monarchy, is the one thing that can't be publicly restored. There's a haunting finality to the way this played out. No press release celebrating years of service. No montage of legacy moments. No quiet walk into retirement. Just a 5-minute statement from Buckingham Palace that effectively iced Queen Camilla out of the very thing she had spent years clawing her way toward: real influence within the royal family. For Camilla, this wasn't just a public repositioning. It was a personal undoing. Because this wasn't about stripping away visibility. It was about stripping away authority. The type of authority most people never see. The kind built behind doors in planning rooms, in briefing folders, in unspoken nod between senior royals. And now, that door's been shut. Let's be brutally clear. Queen Camilla is still standing next to the throne, but she no longer has a seat at the table where decisions are made. The monarchy has always operated like a fortress, one that's built not just on tradition, but on vigilance. When someone on the inside begins bending the walls, however slightly, that fortress doesn't confront them. It doesn't hold a meeting. It absorbs them, then quietly discards the parts it no longer trusts. And that's exactly what happened here. Because the signs were there. Her growing assertiveness, the way she begun sidestepping established protocol, not dramatically, but consistently. Over time, it raised concern. Not because of her personality, not because of her past, but because she was moving outside the bounds of how power is meant to flow in the royal household. And in this system, power flows downward. Through history, through hierarchy, not through personality. When Camilla began to shift that, by influencing ceremonial plans, repositioning traditions, even making calls that would usually go through higher channels, it was seen not as helpful, but as destabilizing. Now, had this been caught earlier, maybe it would have been redirected. But by the time senior royals stepped in, Princess Anne, Prince William, and eventually King Charles, the situation had passed the point of self-correction. A decision had to be made. What followed was the palace's signature move, a quiet reconfiguration under the guise of procedure. The Winter Stabilization Protocol. Cold, emotionless, strategic. On paper, it looks like simple restructuring. In reality, it's a shutout. Ceremonial influence gone. Input severed. Her institutional reach severed like a cord cut mid-sentence. And the worst part? There was no space to defend herself. No royal trial. No internal tribunal. Just the sound of responsibilities being reassigned and her authority evaporating into thin air. What makes it so harsh, so uniquely royal, is that it wasn't a fall from grace caused by public outcry or scandal. Camilla didn't say something offensive. She didn't commit some cardinal sin. She was simply deemed unfit to continue shaping the structure, not as a punishment, but as a preventative measure. That's a monarchy's logic. When someone's influence becomes a variable, they're removed for the sake of consistency. And consistency is everything. Because when the public sees a royal family smiling on a balcony or walking solemnly into a cathedral, it looks like pageantry. But internally, it's precision. Every person in their place. Every role clear. Every tradition repeated like clockwork. The second someone tries to rewrite that script, especially from inside the family, that's when the system snaps back into place. Now let's talk about what this means for King Charles. Because if you think this was easy for him, it wasn't. Camilla isn't just his wife. She's a woman he waited decades to legitimize. The woman he stood by when the press vilified her. The one he made queen consort despite decades of public resistance. And yet, he still had to sign off on this. Because Charles knows better than anyone what happens when royal authority wavers. His entire reign is balanced on maintaining unity. So when Camilla's influence began to challenge the structure rather than support it, even he had to step back and say, enough. The emotional weight of that can't be overstated. To watch your closest allies slowly lose the very influence you helped build, knowing you had to be the one to end it, that's not leadership. That's sacrifice. But that's the crown. It doesn't care about personal history. It cares about... And then there's Prince William. You can bet he was watching this unfold with a sharp eye. William isn't just the heir. He's already operating as the monarchy's future CEO. And when it comes to the line of succession, order is non-negotiable. He understood that allowing Camilla's influence to continue unchecked would eventually weaken the institution he's preparing to inherit. So he acted. Quietly, firmly, without spectacle. It wasn't rebellion. It was restoration. Same with Princess Anne. She's been holding the line since before half the current working royals were born. If Anne raises her hand and says something's off, people listen. And when she began noticing the cracks, protocols being skipped, roles blurred, she didn't make noise. She made moves. All of this came together in the perfect storm that led to today's announcement. Not a press circus, not a scandal, just a few words from the palace, confirming what everyone inside already knew. Camilla had been effectively removed from the royal engine room. And now, she's on the outside looking in. Still at events. Still in photographs. But behind the scenes, she no longer shapes anything. Her voice isn't missing. It's been removed. That's what makes this so sharp. So surgical. So absolutely monarchy. Because this was a lesson in power. In legacy. And in the fragility of both. Camilla didn't get dragged in front of cameras. She didn't have her titles revoked. She simply got reassigned into irrelevance. A gradual undoing of the quiet influence she spent 2 decades building. And there's no road back from this. Not because the door is locked, but because it no longer leads anywhere. The royal family has realigned. The crown has recalibrated. And it did so without a whisper of apology. Camilla's fall didn't come in a tabloid storm. It came in a procedural adjustment. And that's what makes it so final. If this story hit you like it hit us, if you felt that cold weight of institutional power closing in, if you caught the shift before the announcement even dropped, tell us what you think. Drop a comment. Share this video with someone who's been watching Camilla's rise, and hit like if you've been tracking this drama from the start. And of course, subscribe for more. Because in this family, when power moves in silence, you know something big just happened.